In this video lecture, we're going to continue our conversation about the ancient Near East. And we are going to move from where we left off last time, which was with the Sumerians, and we're going to move on to the Akkadians. And you can see from the map, they also exist in the Fertile Crescent Valley, Mesopotamia, on the banks of the Euphrates River. Now, the Akkadians are a little bit more advanced than the Sumerians. That's become because they come at a later date, and thus technology is advanced. And with the Akkadians, we're going to focus on the power of sculpture. Now, at this point, as these city-states grow in Mesopotamia, and they're becoming more advanced, with that growth comes the need to protect your interest, to protect your city, protect your people. And so militaries begin to arise for the first time. And so to be able to project that power to any enemy, sculpture becomes the perfect medium for that. So let's begin by taking a look at the Victory Stela of Naram-Sin. This is a stela, which is essentially a fancy word for a large rock. And there is a sculpture that's been etched into that rock. We refer to this type of sculpture as a relief. A relief essentially is a carved sculpture on a stone or a wall that is not three-dimensional. In other words, if you were to walk behind this stela, this large rock, you would not see the backside of these figures. It's not three-dimensional. It's merely a three-dimensional drawing, an etching on the surface of the stone. And so the image on here, the relief here, is really denotes the difference between what we saw with the Sumerians. If you remember the series of registers that we saw on the Great Lyre with those mythological figures, this was kind of fun-loving, kind of whimsical. We equated it with modern-day animations of Kung Fu Panda and Ratatouille. There's a certain joy to these images. That is not the case with Akkadian work. If you look at the Victory Stelae, you see a large figure on top of what looks like this mountain. And remember, in art history, we have a figure that's larger than everyone else. This is hierarchical scale. It is letting us know that this person is important. And who is this person? This is Naram-Sin, a leader of the Akkadians. So the fact that he's tall and he's also on the top of this mountain lets us know that he's important. If you see just above him, there are a series of suns right at the top of the stele, and those suns are denoting the spiritual realm. And so he, like a god, is powerful and can do whatever he pleases. And what he's doing here is he's vanquishing, or he is destroying his enemy. If you look to the right of the image, you can see clearly that there is a spear that's been thrown, presumably by Naram-Sin, into the throat of the enemy, and he is in the process of dying. Naram-Sin is standing over him with another spear in his hand, and he is obviously taking victory over his enemy. If you see even further on with the other figures, there's to the far right another figure who's standing with his hands clasped. He has not been killed yet, but he is well aware that he's about to be killed. And so what is he doing? He is clasping his hands and praying, right, begging that Naram-Sin not kill him. If you then look below, you can see other figures that have been killed and literally been thrown off the cliff. The only other figures that are on this are Naram-Sin's soldiers, and they are in line and they are essentially following Naram-Sin's orders. Right? They are taking the fight to their enemy and they are victorious. This is a big shift from what we saw in the prehistoric period and with the Sumerians, right? Sculpture here is being used to evoke a political idea, the idea of a leader, and there's a lot of powerful imagery being used here. And so as civilization grows, the need for artwork to be just more than just beautiful or fun is important, right? There's an agenda that needs to be made. But the issue there, or the ramifications of using work that denotes a political agenda or the ideas of a particular leader is that they're susceptible to being damaged. And so if you look at the next image here, the head of an Akkadian ruler who we think is Sargon, you can see a sculpture, both the front and the side, of the head of this Akkadian ruler. Now, it's made of bronze, a method that I will explain sometime in the future of how you make a bronze sculpture, but it's definitely something precious. It took a lot of time and resources to create this sculpture. We assume that this sculpture existed somewhere in a courtyard or in the front of a building. And what makes this really striking is that you can see, if you look up closely, that the eye has been gouged out. And across the brow of the nose, it looks as if there's been a sword that's been cut over, and put right into the face of this Akkadian leader. And the reason is, we think, is that there was internal fighting happening. So trying to battle for control of Arcadia. And one of the things that you do if you are victorious or you have some strong feelings about a ruler is that you begin to desecrate, or you begin to take down these sculptures, these images, right? And this is something that begins with the Arcadians, both the power of sculpture, but then the need to destroy these sculptures as new people evolve and new ideas come into play. Now, this need to destroy and deface sculptures as civilizations and societies develop and change over time is something that's still with us to this day. If you look in the region where Arcadia was, in modern-day Iraq, and you recall that in the Iraq War in the early 2000s, where Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, was defeated, one of the first things that the citizens did was take to the streets and began to destroy the various images and sculptures of him. One of the most important events of that war was a larger-than-life sculpture of Saddam Hussein that existed in the center of the capital city of Baghdad. And it was something that was televised and orchestrated by U.S. troops. And the reason being, with this powerful image of the sculpture being torn down, it would denote to the world, it would tell the world that the U.S. was victorious and that indeed Saddam Hussein was defeated. So even in this modern era, there is a need to take sculptures down to tell us that something new is happening. And if you even bring it closer to home and talk about the Confederate memorials that are being taken down across the country, you can see that indeed the power of the sculpture, right, to denote a particular idea, in this case, the celebration of the South and the Confederate army of the Civil War, that the need to take those down as we move forward as a country and society is an important symbolic gesture that has become an issue to be debated currently in the United States. The next and final civilization to emerge from the ancient Near East are the Assyrians. And with the Assyrians, we're going to find they're going to take the idea of sculpture as a vehicle of power and take it to the next level. Rather than using sculpture to celebrate one individual leader or the victory of an army, the Assyrians are going to use sculpture at the entrance of their cities. And the emergence of gateway sculpture is going to begin here. And the reason this is important because it begins the tradition of two things. First, creating large-scale sculpture, larger than life. And second of all, it's the combination of sculpture and architecture. In other words, using these two art forms to come together to create something new. And specifically what they're doing here is taking the walls of the city and the gateways, and rather than just having them as doors that allow people in and out of the city, by placing sculptures in front of the gateways, they are clearly sending a message to anybody who's visiting their city. And the message is clearly one of power. In other words, striking fear in anybody who visits them As you see in this first image of the Lion Gate, we see the remnants of an old city wall and the gateway, and sculpted into that gateway are two lions, of which they've deteriorated over time, but you can see the scale of these works, right? And if you see the woman walking through these gates, you can get a sense of how large they are. And by making sculpture large, right, it automatically creates a sense of power, right? Things that are bigger than us, automatically we become diminished when we get next to them. And then it's important to note that these are lions, right? And lions have a certain quality, right, of strength, of power, the ability to crush most any other thing that comes in their way. And so if we imagine them being replaced by two mice, for instance, that obviously would have a different message. And this tradition continues, and we're going to find here in this reconstruction drawing of the citadel of Sargon II that in the gateway to this city or citadel, we had a work of art that was more imaginative than just two lions. What we find here is something that we're going to call lamassu, right? It's actually taking a combination of different features and combining them into a more imaginative creature, much like what we found in the lion-headed man from the prehistoric period, or those mythological figures that we saw on the Great Lyre. And so if we take a look up close, what we're looking at is a kind of photoshopped collage of different features. The body here on the lamassu is a bull or lion, obviously an animal of strength. Then we have what looks like a wing of the wings of an eagle, right? A gracefulness. And then on top of that creature is then the head of possibly Sargon II. But it's a kind of wise figure. You can see the beard, you obviously see the hat, given this individual importance. So by putting all these things together, they're sending a clear message of strength, of grace, of wisdom. And because they're so large, as you walk through them, you would be overwhelmed by this message. And that's exactly what they want you to feel, right? To be overwhelmed and to be in awe that these Assyrians could create something so beautiful and so large, right? It's the perfect kind of billboard messaging, right? Before billboards were created. And so this tradition of kind of flanking a gateway by two large sculptures, and specifically lions, is again still with us today, right? If you have ever visited the New York Central Library, you would have to walk through two lions, right? And matter of fact, I think there's an animation or a series of books called In Between the Lions. And if you were to not be able to go so far away and go to Sacramento Central Library, you would see yet again the entrance of the library with lions placed around both the left and right of those doors. So as we wrap up early civilizations in the Mesopotamia region and we move on to Egypt, it's important to note that these things that we're looking at are going to be central to the Egyptians. Think of the ziggurat in its way that it may connect to the development of the pyramid, or the portrait of a pharaoh and how it connects to the images of Sargon that we saw from the Akkadians. And then finally with the Assyrians and their gateway sculptures and their lamassu mix of human winged lion elements, it's not hard to imagine how the Egyptians borrowed that idea to create the great sphinxes that we'll see in the next section.